Greetings. Yes, I will be explaining my headwear. I will be explaining all of the things that I dare to feel. This spot is special. It's a special spot. I do realize that I have now done 3 presentations here on the porch in this spot, but this one I was going to voyage to a very far away land of Jefferson County today to bring you this. There's a lot to get into, but it's really snowy and cold and it didn't feel right, and it's icy, and I'm going to go make a pilgrimage to this place for a different day pertaining to this person's life. So there are so many thoughts to get into this evening, and I've got my little shrine of gratitude and homage and tribute set out, and I'm going to get into all of it. But I have written a lot of poems about this person, and this one just so happened to be written about the ravages, the emotional ravages of them passing away. And so I'm going to dive in, and I have a lot of interesting emotions, confusing emotions. I'm kind of shaking. I just watched a video about this person's life I haven't been able to watch in, probably 7 or 8 years. And I watched it with my boo, my love, and, I think it was hard for him to see me just really weep about the loss of this man, Jack, that I also loved very, very, very much, and haven't quite been able to let go of, or let go of at all. So I'll explain the mosquito net so I can take it off and be more intimate with you. I was watching this video about Jack's life, instantly sobbing, first image, crying out the gate. And I, as I said, I haven't watched it in years and years. And there was a few clothing items he had in these videos that I have and have collected just unknowingly, unwittingly. And this was one of them. He was in a hilarious photo. He was a camp counselor. He touched so many people's lives, including but certainly not limited to mine. And he helped so many children and young people learn how to make their own canoes and go fishing and go hunting and be independent out in nature. And so there was a really fun, he was at the center of every photo he took. But there was a picture of him wearing this exact mosquito net hat, and so I thought that was funny because I got it at a garage sale, not knowing why I was drawn to it, and there you go. Strange connections. So, oh my goodness, there's just so much to say, and it's very cold, but, oh, and there's that beautiful crescent moon just came out from behind the clouds. Kind of hoping for miracles, even though we'll see, it's not the right time for it. It is the beginning of the Lyrids meteor shower, and my poem has to do with shooting stars that occurred not at the peak or at the right time for the meteor shower. It was much earlier in the evening than they should have been appearing. Usually you can't see them until about 2, 3 in the morning, somewhere's around there. I'll get into it. Everything's tied together. Wow, so much to say, so much to talk about. Okay, so I set up my little area of worship here, of sentiment, and one of the things I put in the area was this labyrinth, and it's sort of like a maze. It's got these balls, these little metal balls, and you're supposed to be able to get them through the maze of the labyrinth. labyrinth represents walking the cycle of life and death and many realms in between. And this actually belonged to my dear magical friend Eddie, who took the exit door from this dimension, from this life. And another piece that I'll read later at another time when I do my pilgrimage probably was a dream that Eddie had about a prince who looked like Jack. And so this belonged to Eddie, and it seemed fitting in the presentation, I guess, the appreciation of realms. Gosh, I'm trying to get my thoughts in order. It's pretty difficult. Okay, so I was gonna light this white candle, white for the spirit. Put it sort of off to the side here so we're not being dangerous. But my special matchbox for the evening, and tonight's gonna be a long one. I am not even gonna say sorry. This is processing a lot that I don't know how to process, and so I'm just gonna tell the stories I have to tell and say the poem I have to say, and however long it is how long it will be. But this special matchbox has an owl on it, and there was many owl sightings and invitings in the years leading up to, well, what am I saying? I was deeply in love with Jack from the first second that I saw him, but in the years of that feeling deepening, there would be a lot of owls. So, where to start? Okay. So, I guess I'll start with when I met Jack. I've talked a lot about, and I'm not going to name a lot of people's names in these storytellings because I want to protect people and such, and I am going to put on my gloves. I was going to say, in terms of kind of chickening out of going to sit beneath this pilgrimage site for Jack today, it's interesting because Jack said no to nothing. Nothing would have kept him away from any adventure. There's a long story I won't give away too many key players or characters or names about, but he once was broken up with at my house, and he went and slept out in the snow in my garden. And I still regret not going out and laying in the dirt with him and telling him that he was the prince I always dreamed of. But he said no to nothing. He helped everyone. He hitchhiked everywhere. He built things, said yes, helped others to say yes. So it's interesting. I couldn't face the icy road conditions and the cold, but there was basically nothing that scared him. My dad retells a story of dropping he and another friend off to go hitchhiking in Wyoming, and he gave them a ride, and he said, I felt bad leaving them there. It was like a blizzard. The snow was blowing sideways, and they just took off with their little knapsacks and insisted that they would be fine, and it was all good, and they knew what they were doing, and that's who Jack was. More stories like that to come. But the very first time I met him, I was sort of kind of, and I say that a lot, sort of kind of dating another friend in the group who wasn't really all in with me by any means, but I had become very infatuated with him and was pursuing that. And Jack was dating a different friend in the group. Met him in Denver, and I turned to this friend that I was sort of dating or pursuing, and I don't have a very good filter, and the filter was just not present in my seeing him, and connecting eyes with him, and I said, wow, that is the first time in my entire life I've ever met a human being and just immediately wanted to make a baby with them. I just want to have a baby with him. And I couldn't help it. The words just spilled out, and I sort of knew things weren't really destined to be perfect between this friend and I anyway. But that's just how I am. I know it's unpopular. Most people just think what they feel, and then they say what they think will appeal to everyone around them. What will fly under the radar and be acceptable. And I've never been like that. I can't do that. So I didn't. I just said what I meant and continued to mean it for years. So there was that missed opportunity that he was with someone else, and then they broke up at my house, and Jack slept in the snow, and I was still with that other friend who was fast asleep on Valentine's and not paying any attention to me. And I should have gone out into the snow. I really should have, but I didn't. So flash forward several years later, there's so much I want to say about Jack. There's so much. I also brought out this cup, and it's got citrine, all kinds of beautiful citrine stones inside of it, and it says signals. And you'll see soon when I read the poem what signals means to me in terms of Jack. So, years later, I would go on that famed road trip with my friends' bands, and I was described by them as a band muse, and that made me feel pretty cool. So went on the road with them. We went through Arizona and New Mexico, and Jack met up with us ever so briefly at one of these venues. And this was just one of so many little beautiful moments I have deeply ingrained in my brain of him. But it began to rain, and we were standing outside the venue, and he knew. I mean, goodness. He knew. And I think he was still pretty hung up on that friend that had broken up with him at my house, and he was a man that many, many people fell in love with. I know that, and I'll speak more to that. That doesn't change how deep my love was. It doesn't. It doesn't rewrite that for me, that it was a shared experience among many. I know that. But he knew when I looked at him that it was as if I was looking upon a god. I don't know how else to say it, because that's the truth. Someone who was human proof, who did not succumb to all of those annoying, dumb human things that seem to affect everyone else. But they didn't affect him. He was immune to them. Or so it seemed to me. So we're standing outside, waiting for the show to begin, waiting to be let in. It was raining, and he reached up above the marquee, or towards the awning that led to the marquee, and the rain was dripping down, and it was like a ballet. His hand was like a ballet dance. And he reached up, and the water was dripping down from this awning, this decline, and I watched the droplets run down the length of his very muscular arm. And he wasn't the type of muscular where he worked out in a gym. He was the type of muscular where he built cabins in the middle of the wood and carved canoes out of logs. And his skin was perfectly kissed by the sun because he loved it. He loved her, and she loved him. Usually I describe the sun in a masculine sense, but I think the the sun and the moon are gender fluid, but they too were in love with him and kissed him all over. And so he reached up. And these droplets went all the way down the length of his arm. And I was watching in ecstasy. I can't ever describe to you a moment that I felt more aware of beauty. So much beauty, it blew my mind. And it was better than childhood. It was better than everything I had felt leading up to that. And he caught me. He caught me staring at the droplets, going all the way down in his arm. And it was one of those moments where it was just the two of us in that enraptured bubble of this ballet he had done with his hands and the droplets. And he saw me seeing him, and in the sexiest, beyond sexy, I mean, he was like Robert Redford mixed with the elemental gods. Like, it was just beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And he licked one of the droplets before it got to his arm. He reached up and grabbed another one, and he purposefully, like he was tempting me with it, he held it right close to my face as it dripped down. He said, "You like that, huh?" Oh, I've never been so enchanted. I've never been more enchanted ever in my life. "You like that, huh?" Oof! And he just read my whole soul like a book and knew and saw me seeing him, and it was a dance. And he was just there for that night, and then he was off on his way. Yeah. So then there was the one day that we got together, he and I. And it was easily one of the best days of my entire life. And I was getting ready to move to California, and he was going off on some trek into the wilderness. And I caught him, and he rarely ever answered the phone. I believe I had to call him on a home phone. He was not the type of person who needed a phone. And I wanted to get together with him, and he wanted to get together with me. And we wandered around Denver, and I wore these boots because these were the boots I was wearing. And I've actually had these pink cowgirl boots since I was 5 years old. They were a little big on me then, fit me great now. But I was wearing these pink cowgirl boots. And gosh, I wish the dogs would stop barking. Jack would just say, "That's what dogs do. They bark." So I wore my pink cowgirl boots, and I've written this into several of my poems. But he said to me the first second he saw me, "Well, girl, those boots were made for a lot more than walking." And so I thought, all right, well, there's the flirtation element that I've been waiting all these years for at this point. I had told other friends, like, he is like a mirage, too beautiful to be true. I don't know how to approach him. I don't know how to tell him human thoughts. Everything I say sounds jumbled and not good enough for his ears, you know. We wandered around Denver, and I write this in the poem. Comes to play in the poem. But we ended up on a grassy hill that was so like a postcard or a dream. And we laid on the hill for hours and shared a kiss that would be our only kiss. And I regret that. It makes me sad every time. I don't know. There should have been more. I wanted more. I wanted so much more. And We stared into each other's eyes for, I don't know, 3-4 hours before that kiss happened. And he just played me like a harp with so many strings. And he saw me fighting for it, fighting to be seen by him in whatever way would keep him close or bring him back to me or let him choose me or something. I don't know how to put it because it's not like he was not like other humans. But I was doing that thing with my eyes where I was like pleading for him to notice how in love I was. And he did. He knew. But he was sort of bartering with me or debating with me. And he said, I don't know, Teal. I don't know if I could walk that romance shore with you because you go in so deep. And I nodded. Most people, this may come as a surprise to you, audience, but most people I end up doing most of the talking with. And him, I just wanted to listen. He could read me just by my eyes. I didn't really have to explain anything. But I just wanted him to do the talking. I wanted him to take the lead. And he said, you go in so deep, Teal. I've seen the way you fall in love. And what was interesting about that is maybe because I had pursued someone in our group before meeting him, he thought that that was love to me. And maybe I thought it was for a moment as well, but what he didn't know was that, like, nothing ever felt like love before or for a long time after in any way that came close to that. And he didn't know that. How could he know that? But he'd seen me be romantical and romanciful around others, and he said, it is just the deepest well with you, Teal. It is the deepest ocean swell. It is dangerous. I remember he called it dangerous. And he said, if I were to let you love me like that, I know I could hurt you so much, so deeply, and I can only imagine that your capacity for love is unequaled to your capacity for pain. And he was right. He was right. But I remember saying to him, and this whole day was a romance movie beyond all imagination. But I said, to be able to be honored to love you and be allowed to love you, to have you let me love you, would be worth any amount of pain. I said, I would love for you to hurt me like that. I would love for you to hurt me like that. It's hard. It's really hard. This is 10 years later, guys. He died on this day a decade ago, and it feels like 5 seconds, and it feels like 5 million years. But, I was trying to wear him down and rationalize and barter this deal. And words weren't enough. And, I wove this into the poem, but I remember, and I'll get into this more too, but I remember being really afraid to share my thoughts at his funeral service years later when he died, at his memorial service. Celebration of life was what we called it for Jack, because that's what it was. It wasn't black clothes and mourning. It was lakes and slingshots and celebration and laughter. But I was afraid to say my words in front of everyone for reasons I will explain. And I told this story, and everyone was so moved by it. Everyone came up to me and talked to me about it. But that day, in the green grass, right by the Museum of Nature and Science, my favorite museum, he told me that, man, this is hard. He told me that when he was awake, when he was in the world, when he was walking and talking and having coffee, he couldn't picture himself as anything other than a young man, as like making it to old age. And it was only in his dreams that he would see himself that way. And he said, I don't know if someone with a spirit like mine can make it to old age. I have so much in me. I'm saturated with so much vigor and adventure. And I don't know how long that can be sustained. And in my dreams I see like grandkids and family, but when I'm awake, when I'm present and in my thoughts, I don't see it. And of course I didn't take it seriously then. It was just an existential feeling, and we talked about children to children or not to have children, or all those things. And I didn't know then how heavy that conversation was, what that weight meant. But he told me that, he shared that with me. And then we wandered and we went over to the gardens behind the museum, and there was this fountain. It was the kind with the circular holes, and the water shoots up, and it shoots up different colors, and it goes up different heights, and it catches rainbows in the light. And I had gone to that museum dozens of times. I mean, I loved going there. And every time I had been there in the previous 6 or 7 years, the fountain was turned off. There was always some issue, or there was water restrictions, or it just wasn't running. And this was a perfect day. Not just perfect because it was he and I, and we rolled in the grass and we kissed. And so in that conversation, that staring into his perfect eyes for hours, he kissed me and he rolled around with me. And I remember him saying in that moment, sort of like, I told you so. When he pulled away from the kiss, like he was ready to get up and walk around because he couldn't go without adventure for too long. He said, I told you, kid, you go deep. And he wasn't wrong. So we made it to the fountain, and the fountain was running, and it was perfect, and it was glorious. And we were running through the fountain and soaking wet. And I remember thinking, oh, this is it. This is the start of our perfect romance, and he's going to kiss me again. And we're soaked through and through, and I turn around, and he's up a tree. Down the hill, in a blink of an eye, he's scaled this tree, and he's up at the top. And I'll leave the sultry part of that story for the poem because it's inside the poem. But what he did next was so beautiful. And we wandered around all day, and I don't know, I thought maybe that was going to be it, I thought maybe that was the start of the story, but he had many other lives to change and many other places to ramble, and I went after my Hollywood dreams, I went out to Hollywood again and again and got kicked around again and again. And another time that I've told you a little bit about, some friends of mine, this was, golly gee willikers, I don't know, the fourth time I was living in LA or something, and some friends of mine, the Paperbirds, this band that I had gone on the road with in New Mexico and Arizona, they came through LA, and I've mentioned this story that they met me and I was miserable and things were not panning out well and I was really having a hard time. And I went up the coast with them, and I told you about thinking we were going to die in the school bus, and my friend was driving behind us in my car, and, and we slept at this truck stop, and that was like my big vacation. And then instead of letting that be it, I took my tiny little Ford Focus, and I took myself on a vacation up and down the PCH, and it was one of the best things I've ever done. And I have explained a little bit about this story, but I didn't give the details that it was mostly about Jack. That so a friend in the group, in the band, when I saw them and I was miserable, he gave me these very specific bits of advice. He said, "Are you finding feathers?" And this was hanging from the mirror in my Ford Focus, my teeny tiny little Ford Focus that would later be crushed like a tin can in a horrible car accident that changed my life. But this was hanging from the window, and he didn't know that. I had met them at a concert venue, and he knew nothing about what was going on with my life in LA. He said, "Are you finding feathers?" And I said, "Well, yes. Actually, I'm finding a lot of them." And I recently told you the story about the Bon Iver concert, and that had just happened, finding all of those peacock feathers and the albino peacock and finding them in the park. And yes, it was a very big part of my daily life. I was finding feathers, indeed. And he said, "Well, then you're on the right path." And that really stuck with me. And then he told me very specifically, "Well, Teal, just make sure that you pull over when you know you need to pull over. When you feel it in your gut, you feel compelled to pull over, you pull over." I thought, okay. So then I went on that trip with them, and I randomly just left LA and told my boss I needed a few days off. The nanny job that I had that was extremely challenging, living in Woodland Hills, the richest part of LA, and feeling desperately alone and just confused. So I took myself on that little road trip, and I think I've told this story, but I'll tell it again because now I'm telling you the specifics. So I'm driving down the PCH, and I'm deciding to take this trip further, and I don't like doing things alone. And I've decided I'm going to do this alone, and I'm going to just sleep in my car for a day and go up and down the PCH and stop on the beach and be brave and see things I've never seen. And so I'm driving down this freeway that's one lane going this way and one lane going this way with a huge, long cement median in between. And it's this long stretch where there's nowhere to turn around. You can't turn around. You're going super fast, and if you've missed something, you've missed it, unless you want to exit and go way out of your way, and etc., etc. So I see distant letters. I'm squinting at it. The Jack Ranch Cafe. Pull over when you know you need to pull over. I have no idea what this place is. The Jack Ranch Cafe. So, I kind of unsafely a little bit, I knew, and I was just about to zip past it, and I kind of skidded into the gravel, and I park, and I go in, and covered, wall, ceiling to floor in James Dean. And I told this story, but it's one of my favorite stories of life. And the waitress is your classic 1950s waitress. Like, "What can I get you, hon?" And I'm like, "What's with this place? It's all about James Dean." She's like, "Well, that's where James Dean crashed his car, don't you know? This is Jack Ranch Cafe. That's where he died, right out there. And that's his tree, and it's a memorial. What can I get you, hon?" And I had pie and coffee for breakfast. And then famously later that day, I would travel further down the PCH and go to the Madonna Inn and have cake and coffee for lunch. One of the best days of all time. But I'm in there, and I'm mystified. And first of all, I always told Jack, whom I didn't even know that they called James Dean Jack. I had no idea it was a nickname of his. And I would always tell Jack how much he looked like James Dean. And they were very similar. Jack was more handsome. Our Jack. This Jack. He was more handsome than James Dean. But he had that deep mystery, that unattainable thing, that veil where you wanted to know everything, but you knew that you never would. And so I went out to the tree, which was right near where James Dean had died. And another thing is that Jack didn't care a lick for celebrity. He wasn't into things like that. But when I told him he looked like James Dean, he liked James Dean because he knew that he had that deep 1 in a billion thing in his soul. He knew that. And he liked that comparison. So I sat at this tree, and it had a huge hollow inside of it, and there was thousands of notes, rolled up notes and cigarettes and lockets and trinkets and treasures that people had left inside this tree hollow for James Dean. And there was all these black polished stones on the ground, and I sat and I meditated and I closed my eyes and I cried a bit and I asked the spirit of James Dean, and this was a perfectly still, clear day. I asked, James Dean, may I please take 3 of these stones, 1 for me, 1 for Jack, and 1 for my uncle, who was a James Dean impersonator for many years and got on the cover of Life magazine for his silhouette looking like James Dean. And just then, the most beautiful breeze picked up, and it had been completely still. So I took this perfect stone for me. This is the little one I took for me. 1 went to my uncle. And then the way that this one came back to me that I gave to Jack is very magical, and I will explain it to you. But this one was Jack's. Very special. Very special indeed. And that's right. That's what it was. See, I'm trying to follow timelines in my mind. I was already deeply in love with him, as you know. But that was the day I gave it to him. So it was reversey, flipsy, flopsy that I had come back to Colorado for a time because I needed to rejuvenate. And that's when I saw Jack and had our day in the grass. And I gave him his James Dean stone, which he was deeply appreciative of. And then I had to go back to LA to fulfill my job that I was really struggling with. And he had to go on to other things. So that's how it happened. Those people came to visit me. I got the stone. I gave it to him on that day in the grass. And he loved it. And then time went on and things changed and love came and went and the story shifted many times. And then I wrote another poem that I read pretty recently, and I said that it was a mystery who it's about, but that anyone who heard it, who knew me at all, would probably know it was about Jack. And it was called Confessing Love Minus the Words. And so that was the last time that I saw Jack alive. I was back in Colorado. And there's another little insert to the story I have to tell. There's just so much. I want to tell you everything, but there's too much. So the situation where I was a nanny was not going well and not working well, and I was not being appreciated enough. And I ended up with my fairy friend who took me in, and I've told that story of, it was either a matter of driving back to Colorado in a night where I had just gotten back, or finding something, and I called my fairy friend and she let me come live with her. So that was kind of like another iteration of another life in Hollywood. And that was full of a lot of struggle as well, and I was having a hard time feeding myself and keeping my health and keeping things going. And I still have the voicemail saved from Jack, and I play it for myself pretty frequently. And I know when I listen to it. He had come back through Colorado. He was in Fort Collins randomly, And this was, of course, after I gave him the stone and we had our rolling in the grass moment. And I knew in his voice that, if I had been in Fort Collins and not in LA, and he says in the message, I just was hoping that you were here in this place, in this beautiful place that you're from, but I reckon you're still out west in California. And I was. And it's that timing, and you're not supposed to do this as a human, right? You're not supposed to go over the what ifs and, well, this could have shifted and then this could have happened. But unfortunately, I suffer from the unfortunate frailty of being part of the human condition, and so I do it anyway. I think about those paths anyway. And I know every time I listen to that message that if I had just been here, something different would have happened. Something very different. He wanted to see me. And I wasn't here. And so that's how it went, I was floundering around in Hollywood trying to be famous, which he didn't see much value in anyway, but he didn't judge me for it. That's the thing, is he could disagree with something and never judge you for it. But I was there trying to be this star, trying to be noticed, and being noticed by all the wrong people. And I missed him. I missed his call, and I wasn't there. So, I just listened to that message a couple nights ago, and I know what I know, I know what I know. So, flash forward, I'm back in Colorado, and word on the street is Jack has a new partner, and he's gonna move to New Mexico with her. And I'm devastated, of course. And there's people who can judge me for this, like, how could you try to, win someone over still when you know that they have somebody? But that's love. It tugs on you. It makes you do what it makes you do. It's a drug. It's a thug. It's a force. So, I was in Denver and didn't even know that he was going to be there, but I knew. It was like I had that psychic premonition that I was going to see him. And he had apparently been living back there for a minute. He was on his way to something else. He was going to some camp to learn how to whittle crazy things out of wood and make structures out of wood. And but he was back in Denver for a bit, and I didn't even know this yet, because people were keeping information from me because he had someone. Whatever, it's that protective thing, It's okay. We define each other. We define relationships, and it's okay. It's just something people do. But he was living on a porch, and I couldn't have been more enchanted and delighted by that. And he had lived on this porch before, so it was going back home, or he wasn't living there, but he was staying on the porch, but he had lived there previously, just on a porch, and that was his room, and he contributed, and he was the kind of person who could live a whole luxurious life on a tiny porch outside and make it better and make it mean more than a mansion. So I was in Denver, and I had heard little whisperings that maybe he was around, but nobody really knew, and he didn't really have a phone, and he would come and go as he pleased. So I was not guaranteed to see him, but I made the trek, and there was some music being played, as there always was, but my real goal in my mind was hoping that I would see Jack. And so I write in the poem that's like confessing love minus the words that I flung my purse when I saw him. It was like he walked through the door and my arms jutted out and I flung everything that I was holding because the excitement was so vast. And I was shaking and everyone wanted time from him because that's who he was. And I said, Jack, can we take a walk? He said, sure, kid. He's always calling me kid. Loved that, of course. Sure, kid. So we went and we sat in the grass. And I told him, basically, like, look, I know you've got somebody and I know you're going on to this other thing and this other step. And I didn't say the words, I love you, and I wish I had. But he knew, and I said everything but that, I said everything but that. And just gazed in his eyes and said, just hold on to the stone, would you? And I wrote him a poem. I made him a beautiful letter with beautiful images on it. And said, please just read this when you get to where you're going. And I know that you're an arrow, and when you have somewhere you're going, you're gonna get there. But when you get there, will you read this and think about it and look at it every once in a while and just know that I'm always gonna be thinking about you. You're a person I can't ever stop thinking about. And he just gazed at me with such kindness and said, "Oh, Teal, you're a person I'll always be thinking about too." And like I said, I don't know what would have happened if I was in Fort Collins that day and things, and I can't take that path because that wasn't the path that got taken. But so he went on his way and went to his camp and whittled things out of wood, and life went on, and he moved to New Mexico with his partner, and I fell for a bunch of guys that were bad for me in so many ways. And then, flash forward a little farther, and he wasn't the person you could just call on the phone. He didn't have a cell phone. He had a cell phone, but he didn't have a cell phone. You know what I'm saying? He had a cheap, barely working phone that was not a smartphone, and he barely ever looked at it. And I think once he got to New Mexico, it was basically a paperweight. And he wasn't on social media. Goodness gracious, he never would have been. If he was alive today, you would have never found him on social media. But he was establishing this life with this person, and so flash forward to 2011, and I go to this powwow, and I bring this with me. It's a little satchel that I got at a powwow when I was a child. I'm also wearing my corn necklace because it's from New Mexico, which is a sacred and special place to me. And I was wearing this satchel, and I had my James Dean stone in it, along with some feathers and some other trinkets. And I was wearing this at the powwow, and I just kept thinking about Jack. And I'm always thinking about Jack, so it wasn't that shocking, but it was like I was really, really thinking about Jack. And my mom said she saw me walk down to the bottom of the arena where the dancers were dancing, and she said, it looked like you were in this hypnosis, Teal, like you were looking at someone who wasn't there, and you just disappeared. And she said I became very sullen, and I did. I was in this weird, trippy state, and I felt consumed by something that I could not describe. And she said it was like I was looking at a cloud and trying to figure out why it was following me. And there was dancers, beautiful dancers, right in front of me, and there I was, staring at this invisible cloud, staring off, disappearing. And Jack was dying right then. He was dying right then. While I was at that powwow, while I was staring at that strange invisible cloud that I couldn't figure out, and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know why it was following me, and it was a feeling. And he was leaving the earth right then. So he died as he lived, in service to others. He had bad asthma, and that's why when he slept out in the snow at my house, I thought, what a crazy man, what a madman. God, I love him, but he's crazy. What is he doing out there? And he always did things like that. Hitchhiking barefoot, hitchhiking in the snow, hitchhiking in blizzards, going here, going there, going everywhere, scaling mountains, riding rivers, everything. Nothing scared him. He wasn't afraid. And so he was building a trail. He was out digging trail in Las Trampas, New Mexico, making something beautiful for others to enjoy. Not because he was being paid, not because he was required to do so, but because he wanted to. And that's how he died. Digging this trail in the sun. He had an asthma attack. And so, when I found out about it, I screamed. I just screamed. I set down the phone and I collapsed and I screamed. And when they had his celebration of life, okay, I'm trying to squeeze in all this information. When they had his celebration of life, it was a very painful time for me. There was this like gathering of close friends before the ceremony, and I asked what time, just assuming I was in this close-knit inner circle of his friends. And a friend of ours said, Teal, there's people who feel like maybe it will make Jack's partner uncomfortable if you're at the pre-ceremony, if you're there beforehand. There's people who feel like that's going to make her uncomfortable because everyone knew how you felt about him. And it was devastating to me. It was so crushing. It was so horrible. And, years later, he apologized and we talked about it. But it was this thing. It was this keeping me from her. And I don't understand it, because here's the thing I thought about is like, I'm so opposed to dying, you guys. I don't want to do that. I never want to do that. And you can judge me and you can think it's stupid or you can think it's silly or it's childish. But the only way that I can cope with the possibility of death is to tell myself that it's just not going to happen to me. I don't intend on doing that. I'm not going to do that. And people think it's stupid, but it's like, I can't bear it otherwise. I can't bear it. And I just tell myself, hey, there's a possibility they could figure it out by then, and then I don't have to die. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And so I tell myself that there's a chance that maybe I won't have to. But I think about it, and it's like, if that were to happen, I hope that there is just so much love for me that it's just like so abundant that people are like sliding on the floor because their love for me is just spilling and it's dripping and it's so abundant that it just covers the walls. And you can't see the beginning and you can't see the end of it because there's so much love. That's what I want. And love comes in so many forms and people try to define it, especially when it comes to like male-female relationships. It's like you're either, a relative A former lover, a girlfriend, a wife, or a friend. That's it. Or just an acquaintance. And people don't allow this room for all these subcategories and all of these, the complexity of loving someone. And I don't understand that. Or, oh, you didn't make it to this tier of loving them. You weren't defined in this facet of loving them. And so you need to take a step back. I understand it, but I don't understand it. And I certainly didn't then. I was so hurt. And so I took it upon myself, took matters into my own hands, as I often do with these things. And I approached her. She had never met me. And no one told me who she was. No one pointed her out to me, but I knew. I saw her. Okay. Awkward cut to my phone actually died outside because it is so incredibly cold. I didn't even know that was a thing, but my boyfriend told me that the power will drain much more quickly if it's extremely freezing, which it absolutely was. It's actually really cold in this room as well, but it's about 26 degrees outside right now. So as much as I'm trying to be like Jack, I don't want my phone to die again. It probably looked very awkward because I just stopped talking. My phone does this thing where it shuts down and the screen goes black, but it's still kind of filming for a few seconds. So here we are. Inside, new location, have to finish, obviously a very important one to me today. And as I came inside and was so cold and had to warm up a bit and recollect myself into a new location and be warmed by this beautiful creature here, I realized I forgot to mention a few little shout out pieces of what I'm wearing as it pertains to the stories. But this is actually a skirt that my mom has had since, I don't know, the late 70s, early 80s, from New Mexico and from a powwow. And I wore this particular exact wonderful skirt to that powwow where I was hypnotized by a force I can't explain and had Jack on the brain very much. And my mom knew something was going on, and she's very tapped in, and something was going on. And another interesting thing I wore that was on my finger that day was, this is the Oribus, the snake eating its own tail. And I had been wearing this for a while when I went to that powwow as well, and it was a symbol to myself. People would ask me about it all the time. Why is it on your engagement ring finger? I don't know why people always ask that. It's like, well, it fits. It's a good finger to wear rings on. It fits rings. But it was symbolic to me in that I started wearing it almost as sort of like a nod to Jack, that I wanted to be engaged to myself. And that was the kind of person he was, that everyone flocked around him. Everyone wanted to be around him. But he really only needed himself. And he could wander off in the woods that way. And really admired that, because that trip I took on the PCH where I was alone was terrifying to me. But it was so important to do that. And so that was kind of my little symbol to myself to say, I'm going to make a commitment to me and spend time with me. And so I had been wearing that at that powwow too, and I remember I kept playing with it and thinking about the concept of marriage, the concept of belonging to someone. And I can tell you there's very few people, very few humans on my path I have come across that I've thought, oh yes, I could do that with you. I could give you all of those deep woven human promises, and he was one of them. So I had very specifically been kind of swirling it around my finger and thinking about that. And then this brooch was actually on the coat that I was wearing. Slightly warmer in here, so I took the coat off, but it was given to me by a beautiful French-Canadian woman whom I met on that road trip through New Mexico and Arizona, where Jack joined us only for a day, and he did the thing with the water droplets on his arm, and the VW bus, complete with like wizard paintings on the side that we were driving in, broke down, and we were stranded at a hot springs. And this woman gave me that beautiful coat because I was just cold and didn't have a proper coat, and it had this on it. And I remember Jack seeing it when I wore it and saying, just the way he said things was so much different than the way anyone else worded things. But I was wearing the coat the last time I saw him alive, and he said, "Well, isn't that a thing?" And I liked that. Isn't that a thing? And he sort of touched it, and I, of course, shuddered. I was like, he was just had that touch. But my phone died as I was describing at his memorial, which was at his celebration of life, which was at the summer camp that he taught at and changed countless lives at. And I found his partner without anyone introducing me or pointing her out or telling me who she was. And I knew because she was the female counterpart of him. It made so much sense to me who she was, and how they found each other was very logical to me. I'm not strong like that. It stood out to me how strong she was. And I think that was important to Jack, that strength. Because someone had to keep up with him, he's so hard to keep up with. And you could tell she had planted many things in the ground with her hands, and the sun had kissed her all over like it kissed him, and the experience of living was very much in her palm lines and in her eyes, and you could just tell. And so I approached her and I said, "Hi," and I'm not going to say names. I said I'm trying to just keep names out of this except for Jack. But I said, "Hi, I wanted to introduce myself to you. You're Jack's partner, right?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I'm Teal." She said, "Oh, Teal, I've heard so much about you." I said, "Oh, good things, I hope." She said, "Oh, yes, lots of good things." And I said, "Well, I just wanted to take this opportunity because there's been a lot of energy swirling around me about how people think it's going to be uncomfortable for me to meet you or for you to meet me, because people know that I loved Jack, that I love Jack, and I do." And I said, "But all of that is very, very much the parts of being human that I think Jack avoided. The jealousy and the hearsay and the comparison and, oh, did you hear? Oh, did you know? Oh, it's them." He wasn't like that at all. And I said, and I was gazing very deeply into her beautiful, like, coppery eyes. She had these eyes that were like a gemstone, like this copper, this glowing. And I said, "I just want you to know that any of that stuff, that human frailty, that jealousy, that comparison, that, oh, what about her? But what about me? What does he see in here? Well, what is she? Who am I? What are we?" And, all of that. I'm leaving that all at your feet. And I said, "Yes, I do have jealousy about what you got to experience with Jack, and you got to have this life with him and start this whole life. And I'm so sorry that you've lost that." And I just looked her so deeply in the eyes and said, "Any of that frail stuff that makes people hold themselves up next to each other and take notes and wonder. None of that. I am standing with none of that. All of that's laid at your feet. We're going to leave it outside. And I want you to know that I am only standing here with love and compassion and empathy and just absolute connection to you. I love you because Jack loved you and I love you. And it's hard when you take a chance and say something brave like that and you wonder, like, are they hearing me? Is this getting through? And it was so clear to me that she heard every word and she took it in. And she hugged me in a way I hadn't been hugged in years. And she accepted all that I was in that moment and all that I was showing her and that vulnerability and how hard it was to say those things. And she took me in her arms in the most real and true way. And then the day that followed was just mystical. And it's like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I think, because there was 2 ceremonies. There was one at his former high school, which I'm going to make a pilgrimage to and explain more. And then there was this one at the summer camp. And it was like, I think just about everyone who met Jack was in love with him or loved him in some very deep way that was hard to compare to the love of others. It was so deep. And I mean, I think I probably met 15, 20 people that day, men and women, who I thought, oh yeah, they were in love with Jack. But like I said, that doesn't change my part of the story. And I didn't get to have that dream that I dreamed of him. But I believe, and it's taken me 10 years to own this, I'm still allowed to dream that dream. Even now that he's not on this planet physically, I can still have that dream. And there was women who got up, I would say probably 5 women, who got up and said, I'm going to name my son Jack. And who knows what their story was, but that's the kind of person he was. And we went outside, and it was snowing lightly, and we stood in this huge circle at his summer camp. And it's hard to describe with words, like words don't really do it any justice, but it was this huge circle of people holding hands who just, every fiber of their being could not accept that this person was gone. It was unacceptable to all of us. And I make a line in my poem where I talk about, Mary losing her son and this comparison, and people can be offended if they want to. It's not meant in offense. It's meant from a very, very deep, profoundly spiritually connected part of my thoughts. But there really were times when I thought, like, oh gosh, if Jesus could come back, if people believe that, like, Jack was that spark. He was that 1 in a billion spark. And there was times when I really did like pray as someone who doesn't belong to a particular religion, but pray and hope, like, could you just bring him back? Because he should still be here. And I think a lot of people feel that way about Jack to this day. So I brought a few other sort of show and tell things. This was part of the ceremony, part of the celebration of life. He loved slingshots, and he was always off with my friend Stealth finding wood that would work as slingshots. And so they made everyone these beautiful slingshots with them. There's all these wonderful little engravings in them. And so we all stood on this lake at the summer camp he worked, just changing people's lives every day. And we shot off our slingshots over the lake. And it was amazing. And we hooted and hollered, you know, and we spoke out loud to him. It was the most deeply human in memoriam experience I've ever had, where people were not stuffy or quiet or waiting for their turn to talk or abiding by some orderly, up next we have, you know, it was just Peter Pan crowing into the mountains and insurmountable grief and connection. Really profound connection. And I kept this around for... Thanks for warming me up, buddy. I kept this around for years and years with notes, pictures about him in it, because I always called him Blue Jay. He had beautiful blue eyes, and this is one of the pictures I was lucky enough to be gifted of him. And pretty much says it all right there. Pretty much sums up a lot. And then this is not a picture of him, but I have seen pictures of him in childhood, and before he passed, I found this in a museum, and I bought it because it reminded me of him. Like, just, there he is, little adventure spirit. And it really does look sort of like him as a child, but it just so deeply reminded me of him. And so what I asked his partner at that ceremony was, did he ever tell you about the Jack Ranch Cafe stone, the James Dean stone? And she nodded, and she cried a little, and she said, oh, yes, I remember that stone. She said, when I met Jack, he was working on a fishing boat, and when I met him, he had it tied with twine, and it was hung as a necklace around his neck, and he had been wearing it for about 1.5 years. He told me he wore it all the time. And that was kind of all the peace of mind I needed. It was what I needed to know that, like I told him, I'll always be thinking about you. Just know that. And he said, oh, Teal, I'll always be thinking about you too. And this proved that. And it's not about proof, you know, but I needed that. I felt in the way. I felt like my grief was in the way because I wasn't something on his list. I didn't have a title in his life. And so I felt like this horrible grief that I could not, and honestly still cannot really reckon with or wrestle with. I needed some proof that he was there in that spark with me too. And he was. And so I asked her about it, and she told me, I know exactly where it is. I'll get it to you. And I wrote her a beautiful note that day, and I scribbled it, 20, 30 times, of course, different drafts of it, thinking, oh, that's not right. And I was crouched in a little corner writing it to her, and gave her this note with my address, and just thanking her for embracing me the way that she did. And really not expecting her to follow through, because she lived in this other world, in this other place, in this other time. And she sent me all this sage, which has broken in pieces but still smells so good, from Las Trampas. And she sent me the stone. And she said, Teal, Here is the stone. When I first met Jack, he had wrapped it with this twine, and he was wearing it around his neck for over a year. He kept it in his treasure box, and now it will be yours again. Thank you for the note and for your love. I wish you all the best until we meet again. And, yeah, I can't even really describe how special that was to me and how special it is to me to have this. Obviously, I really, really treasure it. So, and I keep it in here with a folded up picture of him that actually still has some of his ashes in it. So there's a little bit of Jack and my stone. They make such a beautiful noise. And his stone. And I mean, it's a hefty thing to wear around your neck, I'll say that. So that gave me so much to hold about those experiences I'd had with him. And, you know, I was thinking about it in the shower today, that sort of possessiveness people have over grief, of like, who gets to feel it more, or who has the right to feel it now. And I don't know, the weirdest, the strangest things happen amongst people and friends when someone passes to the other side. And I was thinking in the shower today, like, everyone who met Jack wanted to be a main character in his story, you know? Not for him to be a main character in their story, because he was that ephemeral mist that no one could stake a claim on. But they wanted to be a main character in his story. I wanted to be a main character in his story. I think everyone who came into contact with him did. And that is rare. So tonight's is long, and that's okay. Either you watch the whole thing and you find something that you can hold in it, or you've tuned it out already. And either way is okay. But I needed to get this out. And like, you can't get it out. I mean, I'll never get it out. I don't want to, and I won't. But I had to talk about it today. And I'll talk about it again. And be special, beyond special. So the reason I was outside on the porch is because this event that I describe in my poem happened right out there on the porch, standing up on that bench, looking out over my house, in the hours that were not supposed to be the peak hours of the Lyrids, which comes around every year, and I didn't even know at that time that the Lyrids were happening. April 16th was when he passed, so this is probably... See, that's the thing, is I feel like this was a couple weeks later, actually, and that makes it... When I really think about it, I think it was at least 2 weeks later, because the grief was too immense to pick up a pen and make something of it. And so, yeah, this is April 16th, and this is when it usually occurs, but it was over by then, and so that really drives home the shooting stars being much more profound and lucky. I know that for sure, that it was several weeks later that I made my way outside with my grief, looking for something in the skies, and found this. So here's the poem. This would be 105, 106. This would be 106 days of poetry, I believe, yes. April 16th, 106 days. And this one's for Jack. It's called Thanks for the 2 Shooting Stars. The heavy plight of the sunlight-drenched Virgin Mary statue, lost in the overgrown grass of the rose bed. Dead and gone, the embrace of her golden son, hands held high in triumph, they snuffed out the one. I'll needle dig the thorn splinters from my middle fingerprint. Oh, honey, how my heart hurts. Can you wrap it in a splint? That tiny glint of future father light in his eyes, so clearly showcased on that hot fall hill, like a forehead tattoo, forever and still. They've got shackles of restraint round my deepest lovin'. Sky above him, as high up as he is, the faint fizz of primordial combustion. Lust and gumption and a ship full of assumptions to carve out and claim the continents with a human thumbnail. I heavy wailed on my Navajo rug. My head dropped all on its own, like it was being tugged, hooks in my brows. At the powwow that day, gray and aching, the heavens wept. The reservoir sent mournful lapping upon the shore's rocks. My head, my hands, my socks soaked through. And I spoke to you through the elements, the conduit of the careful and close listening given by the atmosphere. So near your hand as I stretched mine upward, the lines blurred between living and dreaming. You walked through this world, you said, not believing in your conscious moments that your body would ever shift from youth. But when sleep carried you to the unspoken side, the stream of dream tides, only there you could see your old man's eyes, your deep wrinkled hands cradling strong, healthy namesakes offerings, grandchildren in green places, the faces of a family you built along with the sturdy walls that were home to them. Please send me more of these visions as the incisions of your passing take their sweet time in healing or even closing up. Let the wood-carved cup bearing each word you spoke to riveted ears, and those you spoke only to me, spill with clarity as the days carry me like a zoned-out crowd-surfing teen over the mean streets of grief. Reinforce and strengthen my belief that love is the only thing worth talking about. Well, at least there's no threat of a drought, 'cause the permanent pout of the skies kept the clouds crying since the day you fill in the blank, 'cause I can't say it. It rhymes with sighed. By mine is where I wish you were. Instead, you're scattered about the earth you walked brave and barefoot upon. I held a handful of you. What part? What part I could only guess. But I hoped it was your heart or your strong chest. I must confess a very strange thing, or strange to others. Under cover of the snow shimmering secrecy, next to the summer camp shack they named after you, I drew a deep breath and I ate some of what was once your body, and thought some may not applaud me for it or approve. I was moved to do so, for it seemed my last and only chance to have you inside of me. Maybe it was an odd way to go about it, but not for a second did I question or doubt it. My tears froze to my face while I licked my fingers clean. And I felt like a fiend wanting more, for I swear I could taste the way you used to smell. Like the swell of every ocean mixed with youth's deepest and most chemical emotions and dirt and strength, and the entire brilliant length of a wildflower field, yielding the most glorious blossoms that can be imagined. And high-altitude saplings and multitudes of magical happenings from starry, far-away believers' dreams. Just then I felt the empathetic beams of the sun reminding me that although I was far from done with this deep-down aching, I was also just awaking to a new life in the making. And through my torrent of heavy mountain shaking, I knew I had a vital task: to take every breath as you did, to bask in new adventures and rid myself of the excuses that keep me bound as an indentured servant to fear. To hear the wind and water calling me out of my cozy nest, to be blessed under the crescent moon's smile of a mile marker I never thought I could reach. To teach a child to plant seeds in the ground. To hear a symphony in the sounds of the forest, a resounding chorus on the wings of hummingbirds. To speak volumes without any words, and to see God in running herds of bison. To fight the tempting pull of nice and predictable, and instead be lulled to sleep by the whispering of an uncharted shore. To get up and boogie when no one's on the dance floor. To make that move even when I'm not remotely sure I should. Because if I would have jumped on that train of thought sooner, I'd have told you long ago just how damn much you make me swoon. That I'd like to croon a love song with your name in the refrain with lyrics no one could ignore. About how this headstrong Taurus implored the fates to carve a place for us beyond the sparkling gates that open to the land of those willing to wait for love. To shove past all the naysayers and play it safers, 'cause you know I'd wrestle a beefy, arrogant champion annihilator just to feel it with you for a second. The hour hand's got his sneaky hush-hush plans, and if you demand some sort of answer, well, there's a chance you'll be found ripping the face right off that circle of measured notches we all set our watches to and make curfews with. Lift me out of this tar pit called time and take me back to the one and only day you were mine. The day we played find and seek with the remains of our child counterparts and bore our beaming hearts in the cleansing gush of the museum fountain. And no amount of things to do or places to be could have ripped me from that incomparable jet stream blue of your gaze. I fell in so deeply for a half hour before our lips wove through a maze of warm air and anticipation to finally magnetize together. And a tether was made that still to this day binds me to the exact flavor of your breath. And the depth of princely enchantment that spiraled like a bottomless well within you, as true as it gets. Wet and weak like putty in the hiking trails of your palm. I've got qualms with the way things go, and I don't know if my complaints have come across the desks of any saints or universal management types, but I'll keep up the fight until you come to me in some lucid veil and tell me tales of your cosmic train hopping, until you drop into my frontal lobe in your angelic robes and tell me that you're still on the move. Until then, I'll attempt to prove that wishing with all my might can turn day to night and make ashes take flight to create a jaw-dropping sight with even a trace of your beyond humanly handsome face. And I would confidently say that all the gods and goddesses and ascended VIPs will have to pick up the pace to keep up with you, rare, sweet blue jay. I later prayed on my deck as I reflected on the luckiest moment when I got to kiss your Voyager's neck. So strong the pillar that holds such a cranium. Little tears formed in my green eyes from straining them towards the sun because I didn't want to look away from your face for nothing. You scaled that big tree by the fountain and you nicked your thumb. I was dumbfounded by your beauty up there. You swung through the air from the quivering limb covered in new leaves. You sucked the blood from your big, opposable digit, and weak in the knees is too simple a description of what that did to me. King of the tree canopies, king of the gentle breeze, you will always have me. Now reality grabs me and reminds me of the way it actually is. How many others stand beneath the Milky Way, that overhead ocean, putting in their bid for some sign, some potion, to bring a whisper of their loved one back. And I could stack such invocations up high as the mountains you climbed, but this time you answered with a giant shooting star, with a tail stretching far across the path of existence. I had some resistance to push it further, It felt a bit selfish to ask you to swerve your route of Milky Way tasks, but I asked you for just one more. I wanted to be sure it was you listening. I paused, then reached for the door to go inside. When there, glistening on a heavenly ride, was another massive star train gliding across the tracks of the other dimension you would not be coming back from. We are the sum of the love we've held, received, and given. Jackie Bean, I've loved you stronger and longer than all the steel train tracks you've ridden on, with the pure illumination of an epic dawn. My heart never hesitates to reflect upon the moments I was gifted the medicine of holding you. The sky turquoise blue with your tree trunk arms enfolding all the love that coursed through my thin frame. The love I couldn't and still cannot tame. We rolled on that hill like it was a game, and our soul-deep laughter earned us points. You know it's another level when a kiss doesn't just touch you. It anoints you with a blessing carried eternally. Your whole being was thermally conductive. I was warmed all the way through in a mental cabin with you, the picture of which is so seductive and safe that I escape there still, willing myself to a well-constructed, snug, and tucked-in happy place, as they say. But I know I can't stay, and the happy part fades when I have to leave you there and wander away from that perfect air you once exhaled into a thick glade, then set sail back to the real world, which often pales in a side-by-side of those aqua-blue swirls which unfurled from your attentive spirit windows. How deeply it is carved in me, only the earth, water, and wind knows. The last time I saw you alive, I told you I loved you mostly through my eyes without saying the words, and gracious me was I ever in the heart-ocean throes. You were on your way hitchhiking to caveman camp. You almost never wore shoes, and I remember thinking, my heavens, I even love his toes. Your tree grows. I'll sit beneath it soon. Pay me a visit if you can for the upcoming Lyrids, the Edda Aquarids, or the pink supermoon. So my phone, of course, started to die through that and was sending little alerts at me because technology can never just read the room and be in the moment with me. But yeah, I wrote about the last page of that today. The ending of the poem 10 years ago was I would confidently say that all the gods and goddesses and ascended VIPs will have to pick up the pace to keep up with you, rare, sweet blue jay. That's where it ended. So the rest of it I wrote today, and it felt good a decade later to add some heart to it. Oh, it's been a ride today. It's been a ride. So be on the lookout for fallen wood that could potentially become a good slingshot, because that's how his thoughts were. So beautiful and so pure. So thanks for being with me on a very long one, but it was important for me to be in all of that heart, and isn't that a thing? Isn't that